geopolitics event in their 2 years on this campus. My name is Christian Mesa, and I'm a sophomore in the college studying government. Tonight we are blessed with the expertise of two veteran speechwriters in this geopolitics event entitled Channeling the President, Presidential Speechwriters. This event seems to exemplify what geopolitics' core message is, to connect students to the distant and often disconnected politics in Washington. It seems that there is no better way to do this than to talk to the people who are writing the exact words that presidents have said in the past. Without amazing events like these, I'm not sure what Georgetown's campus would look like. I was lucky enough to only know a Georgetown campus with geopolitics, and they have shaped my interests and passions in ways that I could not have imagined walking onto this campus 2 years ago. I don't know of any other campuses where you can hear from the writer of Politico's playbook, a former White House communications director, and then go to a panel with presidential speechwriters with more speechwriting experience than I have years on this earth. I would like to introduce you all to the two lead speechwriters for the last two presidential administrations, Cody Keenan and Mark Thiessen. Cody Keenan has been a speechwriter for President Obama for nearly a decade. He started out as a campaign intern in Chicago and rose all the way to director of speechwriting for President Obama in 2013. Being called the Hemingway and the Springsteen of the Obama White House, he has been named to the GQ list of the 35 coolest men under 38 and a half, which may be his most interesting accomplishment. Working on such speeches as the State of the Union, Selma, and the Farewell Address, he has been the pen behind some of the biggest speeches of the Obama administration. Mr. Mark Thiessen is the former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush, working on his speechwriting staff since 2004. Prior to that, he worked as the chief speechwriter for Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, giving him an up-close and personal account of the War on Terror. While in the White House, he has led on multiple State of the Union addresses, as well as hundreds of other speeches by President Bush. He has been named by the Daily Telegraph as one of the 100 most influential conservatives in America. Moderating this panel tonight will be Mr. Robert Schlesinger. Mr. Schlesinger is managing editor of the opinion at U.S. News and World Report. He is the author of the 2008 book, White House Ghosts, Presidents and Their Speechwriters. He has previously worked on the Washington Bureau of the Boston Globe and the political editor at The Hill. It is my honor to welcome the three of you to the Hilltop and get this panel started. I encourage everyone in the audience tonight to continue the conversation online on social media using the hashtag GUSpeechwriters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we get started, I want to thank the Institute. I want to thank Mo and Hannah for having us. I think this is a terrific opportunity. I'm quite honored to be in this company. We have a lot of stuff to cover and not a lot of time, so let's jump right into it. Cody, a year ago, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, 24 hours, give or take, out from the State of the Union. And tomorrow night's speech is not technically a State of the Union address, but for all intents and purposes. So just you're as a presidential speechwriter, are you kicking back as the thing's locked up? Are you in a panic mode because it's last minute scramble? How are things standing right now?
Not panic. Not panic, because we usually locked it up more or less by this point. This was probably the most annoying moment of the entire process, and to explain why, I should probably start with how we begin the whole thing. We usually start talking probably right before Thanksgiving, and we call it like a blue sky meeting where just a few of us would sit down and say what we want to say if we had no constraints, no political constraints, no Congress to deal with. What's like our perfect speech? Go back, pull out some ideas, come back and bring it down to 20,000 feet. We do that over the course of a couple of weeks and then drill down to the nitty-gritty. I would start writing. I'd be doing research with my team for most of December, and then I would start all the writing over Christmas break.
How big was your team?
We had 8.
Is that all writers and researchers?
No, that makes it sound bigger than this, because 2 were for the First Lady, 2 did national security, and we had 1 researcher. So I'd write over Christmas break, get him a draft the day he got back from Hawaii, and we'd spend that week kind of going back and forth on drafts, and then get to tonight. Right now I would be, because the White House mess closes at 8, so I'd be putting in my dinner order right now in anticipation of a late night. Tonight would be the part where it's pretty much done, and I'd probably only start sharing it with a broad group of staff and with the agencies maybe 2 or 3 days before. So at this point now I have to compile everyone's edits. Agency edits, people inside the White House, fact checkers. You have to deal with people complaining, my idea is not in the speech, my favorite policy is not in the speech. So that's the trickiest part. And meanwhile, the president wants a draft back by today's kind of the whole crazy part. And then tomorrow is usually easy. You know, we go through one more draft in the morning, rehearse it once in the afternoon, and then take 3 hours off, and then it's game time.
Now, does that track with the Bush administration experience?
Similar but different, and I think every administration is different. I mean, you talk to Bill Clinton's speechwriters, and he was editing in the car on the way to the Capitol. There's a famous story about his convention address, not State of the Union address, where literally there was a helicopter when he was going to Madison Square Garden. There was a helicopter, and you could see the blue glow of the screen in the back of the limousine while he was editing. It's also funny. His speechwriter tells a story. As an aside, when I wrote one of the speeches I wrote for President Bush was his speech welcoming Pope Benedict to the White House, and we had a little reception upstairs in the residence, and we got to meet Pope Benedict, and he introduced each one of us, and he said to the Pope, "This is the guy who wrote the speech." Which I thought was an incredibly generous thing for the president to do. Bill Clinton's speechwriter tells a story that after the State of the Union, they had a big party in the East Room, and he would introduce him. This is the guy who typed my speech. So slightly different. So we would start usually thinking about, around Thanksgiving as well. Usually we'd have an outline for President Bush before the Christmas break. We would write it. I don't know how you guys did it, but we actually wrote in groups. So we didn't, like if you go talk to the Reagan speechwriters, it was one speechwriter with researchers, and it was their speech, and there was no collaboration. We sort of had a big screen in my office, and with a computer, one guy would type, and then you'd have two guys on either side, and we would work as a team and edit. So somebody would take the first draft and be responsible, he'd be the lead writer and take the first draft, but then you would sit around and collaborate and write together. So you had that team writing over the holidays. We'd get the president the first draft usually right after we came back from Christmas break, and then he would tear into it and work it. We had already discussed the themes. One of the hardest things about a State of the Union address is the State of the Union address is the single most watched speech by a president of the United States. It's also, unless it's done really well, the worst speech the president gives, because it's by definition a laundry list of policy initiatives, and everybody, as Cody alluded to, everybody's coming at you. Every agency wants, got to get my program mentioned, got to get this mentioned, and they're lobbying and they're pushing and they're going through every channel they can. So you've got more incoming as a speechwriter than you have on any other speech that the president gives. And of course, the president wants it to be coherent, wants there to be a theme, so you can't mention everything. It's got to be, there's got to be a consistent theme through the speech. So he's policing that very carefully and making sure there are no what he called, President Bush called cram-ins, at the last minute where he'd squeak it in. And so we would get to the point where he was comfortable about a week or so out, and then he would start practicing in the family theater in the White House, and they would set up a teleprompter in there. A small group of senior staff and their speechwriters would all be in the theater seats, and the first session was an editing session where he would, because it's as Cody will attest, the spoken word is very different than the written word. So something can look great on paper, and then when it comes out of the president's lips, all of a sudden you realize you can't say nuclear. Or there's some words that just seem harder for one person to say than the other, and so you kind of avoid those. You can't really avoid nuclear. So if he's tripping over something, you kind of find a way to change it. There are people lobbying to get their stuff in, and each practice session he would do 1 or 2 a day. Each practice session would be less of an editing session and more of a delivery session. And there was a point, usually President Bush was very disciplined. By this time tonight, there was no more editing going on. He had it down. He was practicing only and he would tell us, okay, there's no longer an editing session now. This is it. We would be coaching, suggesting him on delivery. So usually in a State of the Union, you try, there'd be the times where the people, you're the Democrats, you're the Republicans, this guy cheers, and then that side cheers, and sometimes you try and do like a rope-a-dope where you get them to cheer, and then the real punchline is those guys cheer. So the actually delivery practices, you got to time the delivery so you can say it so that they start to cheer when you want them to, and then you give the coup de grace and get the Republicans going. So there's little things like that you're doing. So by this time, we were not taking edits anymore. If the president was getting edits at this point, he was really, really angry because he wanted to be comfortable with the speech. And by that time, he really owned it. It was his speech. He had worked it over so hard that he was comfortable with it, and he didn't want us to be taking any edits from anybody at this point.
So you, in your post column today,
yes,
put yourself in the position of speculating as to what Trump should do tomorrow.
Yes, should.
Tell us a little bit. If you were,
what he should do and what he will do.
If you were still in your old job, what would you? So first, what would you advise me to?
Well, if I still was in my old job, right, I'd be very depressed because I really am enjoying this much more. I love being the former chief speechwriter as opposed to the speechwriter. I think Cody will attest as well. I loved every minute that I was doing it. There's not a moment I would change or take away, but there's not when Cody and his team came in, there was not a day that I walked by the West Wing and outside the gates wishing I was still in there, because it's a really, you don't realize how grueling a job it is to actually lead it. And so I'm very happy that somebody else has the responsibility for doing this. I feel for them, so I wouldn't be in that position. But what I suggested the State of the Union address is the most watched speech that any president gives. I think President Obama's first State of the Union, and your first State of the Union address is usually the most watched, except for when there's something like a war. So like President Bush, after the 9/11 attacks, his address to Congress, which was in the State of the Union, that was his most watched into his administration. But most presidents, the first one, and I think you would say every one of them went down a little bit with President Obama. The same thing with President Bush. And so this is probably the most people that Donald Trump will be ever speaking to in his presidency. And it's an opportunity to reach not just, so President Obama had, I think, 52.4 million his first State of the Union address. Donald Trump has 25 million Twitter followers. So it's like double your Twitter. So he should think of this as like an hour-long tweet where he can speak directly to the American people over the heads of the fake news media, over the heads of the media filter, and speak directly to the American people, and not just to his followers, but to a lot of those Americans out there who are still trying to decide what they think of it. There are a lot of people who are still, there's people who are his core supporters, there are people we've seen very clearly, there are people who hate his guts and oppose him, and then there's a segment of the population that may have an opinion for or against, but they want him to succeed. Like, we want our president, a lot of us want our president to succeed, even if he's not necessarily our first choice for president. And so he's got a chance to reach those people who are still deciding. And still where the clay is soft, and he still can make an impression before those impressions harden. So how can he do that? My recommendation is so the Democratic Party, and apologies, Cody, but the Democratic Party is in like a miasma of anger right now over Donald Trump. Everything he does, everything the White House does, there's outrage, right? And it's gotten to the point the liberal base of the Democratic Party is just, the motto is resist. From day one, resist. And so, yeah, I mean, the congressional Democrats are dragging out his confirmations of his cabinet secretaries. They're not even talking about doing anything bipartisan in terms of legislation. So what's the way to harness that? Is to reach out his hand to the other party and say, I want to make America great again. Lay out his vision, a positive vision, unlike the inaugural address, a positive vision for where he sees, what does a great America look like, and how do we get there, and what is his plan to take us there? And then reach out to the Democrats and say, let's work together on this. Stretch out your hand and let them refuse it. I think that would really highlight, I doubt that they would take it, because there really is there's no interest in taking his hand and working with him, but it would serve the purpose of showing the American people that the Democrats are not willing to work with him. And the fact is, there's a lot of area where Democrats agree with Donald Trump. I mean, I know everybody's too focused on the travel ban and all these other things like that. But Donald Trump, until recently, he was a Democrat. I always thought that, for me as a conservative going into this administration, my biggest fear was that Donald Trump, as soon as he got in, was going to start cutting deals with Chuck Schumer, because he's not really a conservative.
I recall him saying that Trump was mimicking a lot of Obama.
Yeah, absolutely.
So real quick, what are the three things that you could reach out to Democrats on?
So, first of all, I would reach out to them on healthcare. I mean, Donald Trump used to support single payer. He says we got to cover everybody, which is a goal the Democrats share. What I would do if I was Donald Trump on healthcare is I would say we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. And Obamacare is collapsing of its own weight. It's a failed policy, and explain why. But then he should say one of the reasons that Obamacare is failing is because there was no effort to bring in the other side. There was no effort to make it a bipartisan solution. It was rammed through Congress over the objections of Republicans with no efforts to include their ideas. And so I don't want to repeat that mistake. So what I want to do to replace it, I want to take the best ideas from Democrats and the best ideas from Republicans. The parts of Obamacare that everybody supports, like no pre-existing, covering pre-existing conditions, no lifetime caps. Name some things in Obamacare that you like, and say, I want to work with the Democrats. I want to take your best ideas, our best ideas, and let's come up with health care reform that is sustainable, politically sustainable, and bipartisan, and do what the Democrats under President Obama didn't do. That would be, I think, the Democrats wouldn't take him up on that. I don't think there's not a chance in hell they would, because the Democrats, what they want is they want to see President Obama repeal Obamacare, but not be able to replace it, because you had 51 votes to repeal it, but you need 60 votes to replace it, which means you need Democrats so they can block a replacement. And so you have this hobbled system where millions of people go off health care, and then they can say what we said about President Obama, you're kicking millions of people off their health care, and it's a political disaster, and then they can use that to win the election. You challenge them on that and say, let's work together, and let them put out your hand and stretch it out and let them reject it, and do that on other policies as well.
Dakota, I remember reading a interview with great JFK speechwriter Ted Sorensen years and years ago. He was promoting a book he'd written called Why I'm a Democrat. And the interviewer said, what if your book was called Why I'm a Republican? And Ted's response was, pause, and then, I'm sorry, I've been very sick recently. So if you were still the president, still the chief speechwriter, you were Donald Trump's speechwriter, what would your advice be for?
Well, I agree with the first part of what Mark said. This is your biggest opportunity, this is your biggest stage. And most Americans aren't like us in that they're not checking Twitter and cable news all day long and keeping up on politics. Work hard, raise their kids, and sometimes you just want to go home and watch some trashy TV. I do. But people tune into this. This is your one chance to speak to people who might otherwise not listen to you and might tune you out year after year after year. So I think especially when he is now the least popular incoming president in American history, you have a limited amount of time to shore that up, to show people that you actually have plans to, look, I agree that we should bring back all the jobs and stop bad things. That's awesome. But what are your plans to do that? This is your chance to lay them out in a way that makes sense to people who are still willing to give you a chance. If you can't, and when I say time's running out, his biggest challenge is when Republicans start feeling vulnerable in next year's midterms and start realizing that they're going to lose their own re-election if they don't investigate his Russia ties, if they repeal Obamacare. He needs to hang on to those people and get things done fast. Some of the context going into tomorrow night is at this point, when President Obama was preparing to make his first joint session address, we'd already cut taxes for 95% of Americans, passed a stimulus bill that rescued the economy, passed a children's health insurance law, visited 6 states and a foreign country. So we already had a list of accomplishments. President Trump doesn't really. He basically comes out to basically a list of press releases. So what are you going to do? This is where the rubber hits the road. Are you going to introduce your budget? If so, how are you going to tell Republicans that there's not going to be a political price for massive spending cuts and things the American people believe in? So these are all kind of the fraught with peril things he's going to do. As far as Obamacare goes, I think his promise was to repeal it on day one. Promise broken. And I think that's only because they've realized how difficult it is. He, in fact, said today, I don't think anyone realized how complicated healthcare is. I did. And I think one of the problems, apologies to you, with conservative orthodoxy is they've convinced themselves that it's actually failed, when it hasn't. When we've covered 20 million more people, when premiums are rising at the slowest rate in 50 years. Yes, they're still rising. They've always been rising. Uninsured rates at historic low, and everybody wants to keep pre-existing conditions. Everybody wants to keep the popular things like staying on your parents' plan until you're 26, no lifetime caps. The problem is you can't really do that without single payer or some mix of regulation and a mandate. And I'd argue we did reach out to the other side for a year. It took us 13 months to pass Obamacare, and we built it on Mitt Romney's plan and the Heritage Foundation's plan. So that's about as close as you can get, I think.
Without relitigating the Obamacare, what wild cards, everything seems like there's a wild card these days, but looking tomorrow night, what would you sort of be keeping half an eye on in terms of either what's coming from the president or coming from the audience? What unforeseen might we foresee?
If I was advising Democrats tomorrow night, don't do anything stupid. Don't boo, don't hold up signs, don't wave things, don't heckle. Don't give the president an opportunity to become sympathetic. It's going to be it's not a forum that's built for him. This is going to be a weakness for him because he's used to basically being able to say whatever he wants to a friendly crowd. Now you're going to have half the crowd that just sits, doesn't applaud. Hopefully they don't boo. I would recommend they don't. Just applaud applause lines that everyone should be able to get behind, and don't applaud at others. Let him take the bait and come to you.
That would be good advice for the Democrats. I doubt they'll follow it.
Yep.
I agree with your advice to the Democrats. I think first of all, Donald Trump, we discovered on the campaign trail he's actually not a bad speaker from a teleprompter. He is good. He can deliver a good speech. So I think if he is disciplined and all the indications from the White House are, this is going to be a much more positive speech. I think they took criticism to heart that the inaugural was a little bit, they describe it as dark, though I think it was actually more uplifting than it was, but that's a separate conversation. But I think they're going to try and make it a more hopeful, optimistic speech. So, I mean, I would try and find a way to let the Democrats to expose themselves for how, angry they are. There's deep-seated anger, especially on the House side, with the House Democrats. It wouldn't be hard to get them to make that mistake that Cody's advised them not to make. But the best way to do it is not with a stick, it's with an olive branch. I think the best thing he can do is reach out. I described what he could do on Obamacare. I mean, on taxes, there's actually bipartisan agreement on most elements of tax reform. In fact, Boehner and your boss came pretty close to reaching something. It was just a question of paying for it and whether there was going to be tax increases. Everyone knows there's not going to be tax increases, but the elements of tax reform, you could get a bipartisan tax bill done. He doesn't need Democrats to pass a tax bill. He should say, I can pass this with Republican votes, but I think it would be better for the country if we did this together. So let's reform the tax code together. One of the things that Trump doesn't get enough credit for, I think, is that he's probably talked more about inner city poverty than any Republican presidential candidate since Jack Kennedy. And he got mocked for it. He got criticized for it. He's dedicated a large part of his inaugural address to saying we're going to reform welfare. We're going to create jobs and opportunity to the inner cities. Reach out to the Democrats and say, let's work together for those forgotten Americans as well. And reform welfare, expand educational opportunity, expand vocational training. Let's get training for local police so they can be more effective and also more compassionate when in their policing. And come up with a litany of things that reaching out to the Democrats, and they're not going to work with them. So it's not some sort of hopeless idea that you're going to suddenly everybody's going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya together. But they're going to reject it. And then that makes them look really bad and really partisan and really angry. And if they did decide to work with him, that would be good for the country. So it's sort of it's a no-lose proposition for him, because if the Democrats don't if they actually agree, some Democrats decide to step forward and work with him, great for the country, great for bipartisanship, great for the American people. And if they don't, then they're exposing their anger and their vitriol, which for all the American people to see. So I think there's no harm, no foul.
As a Democrat, do you worry that Trump will take that approach tomorrow night?
I don't. But I also think Democrats have seen that the Mitch McConnell strategy of obstruction works. If Donald Trump asks for a vote on the Supreme Court nominee, where was ours? And when Mitch McConnell said in the first year, my number one priority is to make the president a one-term president, we're not going to work with him on anything. It actually paid off for them at the polls.
He didn't say the second part.
Which part?
He didn't say we're not going to work with them on anything.
No, he didn't say that. That just bore itself out.
Yeah.
But, and I'd say
the Republicans came to the White House to sit down with the president and
Yes.
talk about the stimulus, and
That's
he
true.
said elections have consequences, and I won, and you can do what you do with your ideas. I remember back when you guys came in, because I was there during the transition on the same side you just came out of, and I remember Republicans were terrified of Barack Obama. Here was this effective, charming first African American president, won in a landslide election. They wouldn't even criticize him by name. They were so terrified of him and his popularity. And so Republicans were actually in a position at this point during the Obama presidency, it changed quickly, but in this point of the presidency, where they would have taken crumbs from the table from him in terms of bipartisanship. And because you had 60 votes and you didn't need any Republican votes, not you, but your administration, you basically told us to shove it. And so, imagine what would have happened. I'll give you two scenarios, one today and one back then, for bipartisanship. Imagine if Barack Obama had said, when the stimulus came around, said, look, this is a national crisis. The economy is in the tank. We need to pull together Republicans and Democrats. Let's do $1 trillion stimulus. I'll give you half. You spend, I want us to do infrastructure spending. Let's do $500 million in infrastructure spending, and you guys come up with a tax plan that'll stimulate economic growth, and you do that, and then we'll both own it. And if it works, we'll both get credit, and if it doesn't work, then we'll both take the blame. Republicans, not all Republicans, but a lot of Republicans would have jumped on that, because both out of fear, but also because they're people they're moderates who would want to go along and get along with the president. Now imagine if Chuck Schumer today when he was elected, when Donald Trump was elected, responded by saying, I know Donald Trump. He's one of my biggest donors. True. And there's a lot of areas where Donald Trump and I agree. We agree on trade. We agree on the minimum wage. We agree on health care. We agree on providing more support for single mothers to have health care, to have child care. And so where he and I agree, I'm going to be his biggest ally in Congress. And where he and I disagree, Donald Trump's a negotiator. I'm going to try and cut a deal with him and get him over to my side. And where we disagree, we'll fight it out. Imagine the different tone that we would have in Washington today. But none of that happened. So I think Trump should do what Schumer has not done.
Let me, I want to open it up to questions from the students because I always find that the questions from the guests are always better than the questions from me.
How about a quick rebuttal of that?
Yes, I do want to give you, without, again, when you're litigating with the followers, I want to.
It's funny because I do remember writing a speech along those lines. And I remember the Recovery Act being $300 billion worth of tax cuts that Republicans usually like. About $300 billion to state and local governments to keep cops, teachers, and firefighters on the job. Infrastructure spending, and then some things they didn't like clean energy and a bunch of Democratic wish list priorities. So let's not pretend that we just jammed some. It was only about $80 billion off the original Republican plan, if I remember.
One quick question for each of you to prime the student questions. As somebody who hired speechwriters, what quality or experience did you look for the young up-and-coming speechwriters in the room?
Good question. I hired a bunch, and what I looked for was, this is also sort of like a life lesson, for college students. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be robots. I don't need a 4.0 GPA or a long list of every extracurricular in the books. I want something that sets you apart, something that makes you seem a little bit different, whether you took a year off somewhere. I don't want someone who's been trying their entire life to be a speechwriter. I want someone with a varied set of experiences. I hired someone that spent her first 2 years doing Teach for America in New Orleans before getting into speechwriting. I hired someone who was on television for a while as a producer in Iraq. I hired someone who failed at stand-up comedy and then got into political speechwriting. I always look for something a little bit different because that's really what speechwriting is. You don't have to be perfect as a writer. One of our core tenets of it is, besides being a good writer, being well-versed in history and policy is, empathy. You have the ability to get in your audience's head, stand in their shoes, understand where they're coming from, whatever audience they are. And I find the more varied someone's life experience is, the better they'll be at that.
I agree 100% with the failed comedy writer because most presidential jokes are really bad. and the reality is that people just want to laugh with the president, so it's actually, you don't have to have good jokes. Some of Bush's most best laugh lines were jokes that were actually pretty awful and all the rest, and if I deliver them, you've grown, the president says that it's different. So failed comedy writer is a good credential for that. I agree with don't spend your life trying to be a speechwriter. If you're, you have to be a good writer, so if that's what you want to do, so you should, whatever capacity you're working in, whether it's, if you're a journalist, if you're working on a college newspaper, if you have experience writing speeches for a congressman, but it's not your main job. Like my background was, I had never been, until I worked for Rumsfeld, a speechwriter per se. Speechwriting was always part of my portfolio, but I did a lot of other things for the Senate Corporate Relations Committee. I was a communications director, I did press relations, but I also wrote speeches, I wrote press releases. I've been a journalist. So, being able to write, and what I look for in people are people who don't, this is a big thing for the millennial generation, is people who stuck around a little bit what they were. So, today, we would have this problem in the White House, even back in our time, where we'd get these young people come in as researchers, right? And so people just want to get into the White House and get a foot in so they can work up their way up the ladder, which is normal. Everybody wants to move up. I moved up, Cody moved up. We started lower than we did and eventually became the director of the office. Even at the younger levels, that's true. And we would always sit down and say, this is a one-year commitment. And people would look at us like we were crazy. What if somebody offers me a better job? Like, you can't take it. We had one researcher who came to us, we'd hired him as a fact checker, and he got offered a job after 6 months at the National Economic Council. And he came to me, and Bill McCourt was the chief speaker, I was his deputy at the time, and he's like, I just want to let you guys know that I'm leaving, I'm going to the National Economic Council. And we said, no, you're not. He was aghast. You made a one-year commitment. And And so we made him stay and do his commitment. And you know, the problem with people who, when you don't stick around, so my first job in Washington, I worked at a political consulting firm. I stayed there for 5 years. Then I worked in a think tank for 2 years, then I did a Senate campaign, which was necessarily a several months operation. Then I was at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for 7 years, the Pentagon for 3 years, and the White House for 5 years. So there's not been very many jobs where I just did a year, then found the next opportunity and moved on. And because of that, I was able to develop mentoring relationships with people. There are people today from my first job. One of my first jobs was with a guy named Charlie Black, who's a Republican political consultant. He was my mentor. If I didn't talk to Charlie for 5 years and I picked up the phone tomorrow and said, Charlie, I need a favor, could you drop everything and do anything for me? Because I stayed with him and I worked with him and I developed a relationship. And one of the things that a lot of millennials seem to be doing is trying to get the next rung up because they want to get the next credential. They're so eager to get the next credential. Stick around a little bit where you were. Develop relationships and also learn. You can't learn everything on a job in 6 months to a year. Find something that if you're interested in politics, find a job working for somebody, whether it's Republican, Democrat, that you believe in, for a cause you believe in. Find an opportunity where you're learning, and as long as you're learning and working on something you believe in, stick around. And amazingly, the next opportunity will find you. I've never actually, I think, searched for a job, except when I made the transition out of the White House for the first time. Every opportunity came because I was there. People noticed when I was at the reason I got to the White House is I wrote good speeches for Don Rumsfeld, and somebody called me up and said, we're staffing up for the 2004 campaign, we need more speechwriters, we liked Rumsfeld's speeches, would you like to come over? I didn't even pursue a White House job, it pursued me. And it's because I stuck around and did a good job, so don't be in such a hurry. You know, you'll get where you want to go, and also, don't necessarily set a goal, I want to be the director. I never set a goal, I want to be the chief speechwriter of the President of the United States. It was really cool when it happened. But leave some opportunity, whether if you're religious, for divine providence, if you're not, serendipity. Allow fate to guide you a little bit, because maybe those opportunities will be even more exciting than what you have planned for yourself.
You know, on the failed joke writer, it's actually Gerald Ford, one of his top speechwriters, was in fact a successful joke writer. A guy named Bob Orban, who started out as the joke writer and then kind of took on actual meatier speechwriting duties. Questions?
Can I build on Mark's question? That was excellent. I agree with 100% of it. I would say, yeah,
Bipartisanship is possible in Washington.
And like, not to smack you guys down or bum you out or anything, but I've had, you know, we spoke to the intern program maybe 3 times a year at the White House, and I've had college kids come up to me directly and say, you know, are you hiring right now? Why would I hire you right now out of college? No offense, but like, why would anyone at the Bill Clinton White House have hired me right out of college? Not a chance. You got to build up a little bit of time and be patient. But you know, to build on that, like, I never thought about being a White House speechwriter. It's not like I graduated from college saying, I'm going to wait until the first black president comes around and see if I came to Washington. It took me 5 months to find an actual paying job. I ended up working for Ted Kennedy in his mailroom and did that for 4 years. And part of the benefit of sticking around is you're going to find some incredible mentors along the way, and friends, you know, like people who become your best friends for life. And without that, I wouldn't have ended up at the White House. You know, it was one of my mentors working for Kennedy. I left eventually and went to graduate school. She came and grabbed me in graduate school and said, you know, I've seen some of the things you wrote for Ted Kennedy. And I wasn't even a speechwriter. You didn't have one. You just wrote if it was your issue area. And she connected me with John Favreau, my predecessor, and he hired me on the spot to join the campaign. And that's not something I was planning. I didn't reach out to anyone about joining the Obama campaign. If you stick around and work hard and be nice to people, like, these are no-brainers. It turns out, you know, divine providence can pay off pretty well.
And also look at what you're doing. So you went out and found somebody who Ted Kennedy is like a liberal line, right? Somebody you really admired and agreed with and wanted to help succeed. I worked for Jesse Helms, who was the anti-Kennedy, the opposite side of the other side. Someone I admired and agreed with and wanted to help. And so if you approach life as, here's what I believe in and how can I take my talents that God's given me and the talents that I've cultivated and put those to work for what I believe in to help others, you'll find that is the best path to success. That if you know, go find somebody you believe in, a cause you believe in, a group you believe in, a politician you believe in, and just help them. And you started in the mailroom. You know, I started out my first job back. This shows how old I was. I was doing clips when you literally cut the newspaper and put them with
Oh, yeah.
Scotch tape.
I did that too.
You do Scotch tape and then you Xeroxed it together on the desk.
That doesn't show.
Exactly, and you put it on. You sat there in the copier, and by 6 a.m. it was on everybody's desk in your office. I mean, do those kinds of jobs, and that's the other thing too, is that be willing to do grunt work. Don't think of yourself as you're the next Cody Keegan, because you might be one day, but he started on the mailroom, and so be willing to do those jobs as well.
All right, question on the couch.
Since bipartisanship came up earlier, last semester, Gervin Norquist was doing an interview in this room, and he said one of the reasons Washington is so gridlocked is that the parties view working with the other party as losing now, not just for political reasons, but also because their ideologies have become much more polarized. So, first of all, what do you think, is that an accurate assessment of the current state of gridlock in Washington? And if it is, what are the prospects for improving that or mitigating gridlock and working together?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, the way politics works now is most politicians are more afraid of their base than they are of the middle. And until that changes, you're not going to see a lot of bipartisan work. Chess Holmgren, that in President Bush's first joint session address, he spent a lot of time talking about education. No John left behind. His single biggest Senate backer on that was Ted Kennedy.
Yeah.
The arch nemesis of the Republicans. It's going to be hard to see anywhere Trump can go with something like that tomorrow night. And that's not just an indictment of Trump, it's an indictment of Democrats as well. We could spend an entire panel talking about the reasons why. Gerrymandering, fragmented media, money in politics. But until it changes that politicians on both sides are more afraid of the base than they are of the center, I don't see any way around it.
I agree with that assessment that people are more afraid of the base than the center, and you can see that right now. I mean, you could argue that that's the case with Republicans to some extent, but it's also the case with what the Democratic response to Donald Trump is. So the Democratic base is, in a miasma of anger right now, and the marches that are taking place, and not my president, and all the rest of it. There are people, thousands of people outside of Chuck Schumer's home saying, "You cooperate with him, and you're gone," right? So there's an enormous pressure on the Democrats to not cooperate in any way, shape, or not to legitimize Trump's presidency. And they're terrified of that base. At the same time, you have 10 Senate Democrats who are running. First of all, the field is tilted way against the Democrats in the next election. They're defending 25 seats, we're defending 8. So this by definition, even though it's a midterm election, the president in office usually loses seats. They said the playing field is tilted in favor of the Republicans, and then you have 10 of those Democrats that are running in states that Donald Trump won, including some by 30, 40, 20, 18 points. And they're terrified of the strategy of obstruction because they don't want to get painted in their reelection campaigns as the guys who were obstructing Donald Trump. And then you have this problem where Democrats lost. There were 700 counties in America that went twice for your boss, for Barack Obama in 2 elections, and 1/3 of them flipped to Donald Trump in this election. And so the Democrats, I would think, if I was a Democrat, I used to be a Democrat actually, that's a different story, but if I was still a Democrat, I would be sitting there thinking to myself, how did I lose those people? And what is wrong with my message that they turned away from me and towards this guy who I don't get? I don't understand why they attract me. And what do I need to do to win those people back? And that's why the approach that I suggested with Chuck Schumer would have sent a message to those people. Okay, they hear me. They understand what I just did in that election. And I think that they're not doing that. And so I think that's harmful to the Democratic Party in the long run, their political prospects. For me, it's as a Republican, again, who was a conservative who was afraid of Chuck Schumer cutting deals. This is great. Donald Trump has no incentive to work with the Democrats because they're not giving him it. But I think it's harmful to the party in the long run, and it's harmful to the country in the long run that we can't do things in a bipartisan way anymore.
What sort of things do you do to sort of channel the voice of your boss? Write for him, is that something that they'll do? What are some of the challenges with a Trump speechwriter? Because he tends to go off the script and try to shock the audience.
Yeah. Everybody, in a way, being a Trump speechwriter would not be that hard because what you want is a distinctive voice you can capture, and Donald Trump certainly has a distinctive voice. George Bush had a distinctive voice. Don Rumsfeld had a distinctive voice. Jesse Helms had a distinctive voice. All the people I've worked for. One of the things, so when I went over to the Pentagon for the most important thing you need as a speechwriter is access. You need to be around your principal, not just when it's a speech meeting, but when other things are happening, because you want to know, because your job is to do a both mind meld with that person. Because Barack Obama, George W. Bush, they don't have 40 hours to work on a speech that they need to deliver. They need somebody who understands their thinking, who understands what their priorities are, and who listens to them, knows the way they speak, and can write that speech, basically write the speech that they would have written if they had the time, maybe even a little better. And so that's your job as a speechwriter. And so when I first went to the Pentagon with Don Rumsfeld, and I sat down with him and he offered me the job, he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I need to be in any meeting I want. I need to be around you, not just when you're planning a speech, but when you're making decisions about War and Peace, when you're making decisions about budget decisions, when you know." And so he gave me all, with the exception of certain covert action things, gave me an open door to come into pretty much any meeting I wanted to. And I kept notes on subjects, but I also kept a notebook of phrases that he used. So he had a very distinctive way of speaking. He was like, he started a meeting and say, "Who's nickel?" Or, so he had all these very distinctive phrases. So I kept a little notebook with all these kinds of phrases, and over time I internalized them. And I would work them into the speeches, so when he got the first draft, it sounded like him, because I knew how he would speak. So your job is to sort of not just substantively, and also I would know, as Cody will attest, there's this awful process called the staffing process in the White House, which is when, I think Peggy Noonan, if you want to read a book about speechwriting, Peggy Noonan's What I Saw at the Revolution. It's out of print.
In addition to White House Ghosts.
Yes, but she said, I would describe the White House staffing process as this. Imagine a beautiful newborn, I'm paraphrasing, but imagine a beautiful newborn foal, or doe, who goes out into the forest and is torn apart by all the lesser beings of the forest. But I understand. When you put a speech out into the staffing process, everybody tears it up. They say that, and the thing you get is the president would never say this, right? Take this out. The president would never say it. And you were just in a meeting with the president the other day where he said this, So your job is to be the keeper of the authenticity of the president. There's lots of people trying to get the president to say what they want him to say as opposed to what he wants to say. And so the speechwriter's job is to be that keeper of authenticity as well.
Cody makes a good point that it's not simply being able to mimic the mood, but mimic the thought process as well as the cadences, right?
Yeah, everything Mark just said is exactly right. I mean, access is the single most important thing. I've had friends who've gone on to, write for somebody else, whether it's CEOs or whoever, and you're channeling it through a communications director at some company, and it just doesn't work. I told them just leave. If you're not going to get access to the person, you're never going to work well together. But I forgot your question already. I'm sorry.
No, it was about the not simply
It's not.
getting the case.
It's not mimicry.
Getting the.
This was my first real speechwriting job. I'd written 5 speeches for Ted Kennedy, and one thing he had in common with Donald Trump is he'd just say whatever he wanted to anyway. But so, for me, the first 2 years of the campaign actually were mimicry, and it's not a good way to go about speechwriting. I was fortunate that I had, John Favreau as an editor, but Barack Obama was on the road every day in 2007, 2008. I met him, for the very first time in the Oval Office, even after I've been working for him for the whole campaign. So once I got that access is when I got it down. But it's also constant study and practice. Read every interview your principal gives, watch every speech after you've written it. You'll pick out different things and ticks, and if there's something he doesn't like in the speech, you'll see him change it on the fly or add something. So you've got to be constantly paying attention.
Hey, what is the most memorable speech that you have done and why?
Yeah, there's a lot of different answers to that. Mine was welcoming the World Champion Chicago Cubs to the White House. Only because I've been waiting for that for 36 years. My favorite was Selma. I think Selma was his purest distillation of, what he believes to be true about America, what he believes about patriotism. And it was a speech where we spent a lot of time talking on the front end, and then we were lucky enough that week to have a snow day where, as you guys know, everything in Washington shuts down. So we had a full day where he didn't have to do meetings, where he could pass drafts back and forth. It was probably our best collaborative process.
It's funny how the sports speeches are always the favorite. When you talk to a speaker, I love to write the Stanley Cup ceremony speeches.
We had the Blackhawks 3 times.
I know. I never had my Rangers come through. One year, I actually wrote the speech for the Rangers and sent it to them during the playoffs. so they would see what the speaker did if they won. It didn't work. But for me, the most interesting speech I ever wrote was President Bush's speech revealing the existence of the CIA interrogation program, which he delivered in the East Room in 2006. And that was a speech that was so highly classified at the time that I was writing it that I had to write it on a top secret computer in a secure compartmented facility at the National Security Council. It wasn't even connected to the classified internet. Hillary Clinton tried that; she would have been president of the United States. I sat. The speech was actually the topic of the speech was classified, so we didn't even acknowledge it was a covert action program. It's probably the first time a president had ever delivered a speech explaining the existence of a covert action program. And so I would go off to the NSC for days on end, and my fellow speechwriters would say I was in my undisclosed location, and I would work on it. And one day I got a briefing from the CIA, and I sat down in a room with a bunch of CIA officials who I didn't know. They were all covert operatives, and they explained to me the program and how it worked, why the techniques were effective, what intelligence they had gotten from it. And as I was listening to them, it dawned on me that they were speaking in the first person, and the guy sitting next to me, across from me, was the guy who waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and got him to give up plans for the follow-on attacks. And so I wrote this speech, and it was literally declassified the day before the delivery. Until the very moment of delivery, it was a top secret code words information. So it was a fascinating process to go through that declassification process. And interestingly, after that, we continued that process. So the President Bush liked the idea of we're in a new and unprecedented war with an enemy that people didn't understand. So he asked us to declassify a lot of information. So I would go and sit down with the intelligence people at the NSC, get a full briefing from the intelligence community on a certain topic, and then I would write the speech on a top secret computer, and then we put it through the classification process. And it was heartbreaking. Sometimes the stories were so good, you know what it was like when you get a really good story you want to tell, and for some reason something doesn't work, and they said the fact checkers have to take it out. Well, in this case, it was sources and methods we had to take it out. So there were some things that you wish you could put in the speech that you couldn't, but they would be a lot of good stuff came out, and so we were able to declassify it and put it through and get it out to the American people. So that was something. I don't know if you guys continued that kind of collaboration with the intelligence community in your administration, but it was something. I think it was the first time that had ever happened in a White House in an extended way.
There was a story that the speechwriter William Safire used to tell about when he was writing a speech connecting back to the Vietnam War, and being fairly new to the White House, he was feeling and working on a national security speech was feeling pretty good, and put top secret, whatever at the top, and then a couple days later asked Kissinger, why hadn't I gotten this speech back? And Kissinger said, you're not cleared for it.
My question is, how Obama was kind of became a social media world star in the recent years. So where we would see like pieces of his speeches that would make everyone like go wow, cry. Was that kind of aligned with a political marketing campaign, a communications team? How did that? Were the speeches were a consequence of some kind of previous advice, or were they like just President Obama speaking and all the communication right after?
And let me quickly ask the flip side of that too. What kind of challenges do you face? 50 years ago, the president gives a speech. You could watch it on TV, listen to the radio, or read a book. Now the president gives a speech, you can do any number of things. So
and my question is, how was that different in times where social media wasn't as it is today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, you just nailed the answer. It's that we never wrote speeches with an eye for social media, but we had a digital strategy office that worked closely that didn't just maintain our own social media accounts, but worked with others to spread it out there. And that's precisely because the bully pulpit is not what it used to be. Not just because viewership declines every State of the Union address, but 50 years ago you had 3 newscasts, and they would play 7 minutes of a presidential speech, and that was it. That was how people got their news. Now you can choose your own news. You can make your own curated news feed. People don't have time to watch everything all day long, and it's mostly sensational. So however we could spread whatever we were trying to get across, we would do it. Whether it was putting a story in Good Housekeeping magazine, because someone might read Good Housekeeping magazine who otherwise doesn't follow politics, and somehow we can get our message out to them. So, you know, and I don't even think we ever even mastered it. You guys didn't really have to deal with Twitter. I mean, that changes everything. I hate Twitter. No. And Twitter is the bane of a speechwriter's existence for two reasons. One, because everybody has an opinion, and two, because, you know, as you're watching a speech, you know, and you're watching people tweet about a speech, they'll complain that this is not in there, this is in there, and you're like, hey, guys, there's 30 minutes left. Like, we will get to that in 3 paragraphs, just wait. So, and, you know, President Trump will have to deal with something else we haven't even dreamt up yet. You know, it's changing faster than ever, and I don't think we ever fully mastered it. I think we probably came closer than most other politicians have.
And Mark, Trump obviously has a unique relationship with Twitter. As a presidential speechwriter or communicator, how would that be an advantage, a disadvantage, double-edged blade?
I never had to deal with Twitter as a presidential speechwriter, so I don't have the experiences you have with it, but I've been one of those tweeters during your speeches, commenting on it. So I've been on the other end of the Twitters. I think one of the bigger problems that we have as we have this proliferation of 24-hour cable news and Twitter and all these different vehicles is that presidential overexposure. I think the president's just in your face all the time. And I'm not saying, you know, Obama or Trump or whoever it is. Trump is new now, so everybody's listening to everything he has to say, but over time you get exposed, and it lessens your ability to move numbers on an issue, because when people hear you all the time, eventually they start tuning you out. You know, and so there's I think presidents speak too much today. You know, in Sapphire's day, the president would give a handful of speeches during a week, and that would be it. I mean, President Bush, we sometimes had 2 or 3 events a day where writers were writing. You know, not everything was not a major speech, but he was, you know, out there pardoning the Thanksgiving turkey, you know, welcoming the Girl Scouts, welcoming the Cubs, and also talking about, you know, President Bush would never let a week go without some event on the war, which is important because they felt it was important to report to the American people about our progress in the battle against the terrorists. But at some point, it's just, I don't know where it happens, where the inflection point is in administration, where it's after the re-election, or at some point people just start tuning you out and not listening, and the power of the bully pulpit is being dissipated by the fact that it's always there. So I think there's actually would be, some president one day would have a smart strategy of being a little bit more Coolidge-esque and speaking less, because the power of what he or she would say would be more. It's like the beast has to be fed, Twitter has to be fed, Instagram has to be fed, Snapchat has to be fed, cable news has to be fed. You know, starve it a little bit, and people will pay more attention to what you're saying.
I lost that argument all the time.
Yeah. With all speechwriters make it. Yeah.
And if you I mean, you can draft and you can look at the numbers, and it's true. And FDR is famous for fireside chats. He gave a couple a year, and he would speak not every day. And I saw a exit interview that you did where you had tallied the number of speeches that Obama gave, and it was 400 something a year.
3,577.
So it was a lot.
3,477 or 3,577, I forget.
So if you walk into the West Wing, into the where the Marine Guard is outside, and you walk into that room, there's a bookcase there, and it has the speeches of the president, bound volumes of the speeches of the president. And as it goes, every administration, each president gets longer and longer and longer. And I think presidents need, Silent Cal had it to some extent. I think, you know, again, it's a losing argument. I fought it, you fought it, but some president one day will figure it out that you don't have to be in people's faces all the time.
Well, that seems like an appropriate note on which to adjourn this.
No more speeches?
No more speeches. Thank you guys very much. This was great. We're going to round of applause.